Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to a very special episode of C-SPAN. My name is Megan, and I'm live with our water quality manager, Veronica. And she's going to teach us all about how we keep our water clean and healthy at the Florida Aquarium for our animals.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys are staying safe, healthy, and hopefully dry, given all of the rain that's going on here. As she said, my name is Veronica. I'm the water quality manager here at Florida Aquarium, and my job is to manage our water quality laboratory operations and to kind of oversee our salt and freshwater operations. So I want to kind of give you guys a look at what we do here in the lab. A lot of the perceptions of aquariums are look at all of these beautiful animals, and now you guys are getting a chance to see what we do behind the scenes to make sure everything is safe for all of our beautiful animals. So what we have in here, this is our water quality laboratory. Welcome to our home. So we've got several different stations in here in the lab. You'll see where she's panning right now is our spectrophotometer station. If we pan a little bit to the right here, we will have where we do our various titrations. We can titrate for alkalinity, we titrate for calcium here, and I will explain those shortly. And over here on this side is where everything sort of starts. So we start here. This is where we monitor pH and salinity on all of our different systems. We have different systems that come in every day. So the bottles you see stacked up here are all of the different systems that we're checking today. Now the two probes that you see here in 4-5D, one of them is a pH electrode and one of them is a conductivity electrode. And you can see from the meter reading, we are reading salinity and pH. So we've got from a 34 ppt, which is parts per thousand, we've got a saltwater sample here with an 8.5 pH. So we're in really good shape in terms of our pH and our salinity on that particular system. All of that information will then be recorded onto a log every day. So we log all of the data that we collect. It all gets put into a database so that we have years and years and years worth of data on all of our different systems to make sure that we are following trends and making sure that the water is the best quality we can have. So over here we have our alkalinity titration station. So this fun green unit here actually will do a titration for alkalinity. So it's actually stopped running because it's displayed a result. So we've got an alkalinity of 71, basically milligrams per liter. Now, what we're doing with this titration is we are actually changing the pH of our water to get a known value in terms of milligrams per liter of our alkalinity of the water. So we've got something that automatically titrates and finds a pH endpoint for us to take some of the human error out of it. Now, a more fun one, if we want to see it, is the calcium titration. Now, this one, I don't have a machine to do it for me. I have to do this for myself, but I tend to like this one because it's a very fun color change. So when one is titrating, titrate means you want to just add a certain amount over time to see a type of change. In this case, we're looking for a color change. So we're actually looking for this color to change from pink to blue. So we're going to go ahead and add. So what we're adding is we're actually adding EDTA to this. And it is going to react with the chemicals in the reagent to change the colors. So see how it changed? So it tends to happen pretty fast, but now we can take that color change and take a measurement off of our burette, and that will tell us the amount of calcium in the water. So that's basically what's happening with this station. Now, the most important thing that we do in the water lab is we monitor our nitrogen cycle. So the nitrogen cycle is basically how the system is going to deal with the waste that's going into the system. And by waste, I mean, in delicate terms, the fish poop, the fish pee, the excess food, the excess everything that's going into the system has to be disposed of in some way. So what we rely upon to do that is actually bacteria. So the bacteria is forming the nitrogen cycles. We have several different types and colonies of bacteria that reduce these chemicals to make the water safer for the animals. So to get into that just a little bit more, when we add animals to a system, system, they add ammonia to the system through their waste, through their food, things like that. The bacteria will then go in and reduce the ammonia from ammonia to nitrite, and then there will be a second colony that will reduce that further from nitrite to nitrate. That's what we're watching very closely in our water lab. So right over here, I actually have some ammonia samples that I've already prepared that are currently reacting. So right now, everything's pretty yellow. Nothing really exciting to see just yet. These have about 10 more minutes to react, but here we've got one. So what we can see is, let's not go with that one, let's go with this one. We've got a bright yellow and a green. So green means we definitely have ammonia present in this sample versus yellow, which means we don't have ammonia present in that sample. In this case, the sample that is green is good. I want that particular sample to be green if there are no fish in that system. So what I'm doing with that particular system is it's a system that is empty, doesn't have fish in it, it's currently circulating. We're actually preparing it for fish by adding ammonium chloride to the water. So we're simulating the action of the fish to encourage the bacteria to grow, reduce that ammonia from ammonia to nitrite, further over to nitrate, in advance of the animals going in. So this makes sure that the water is safe for the animals before they go in, and they don't have to grow the bacteria while they are present dealing with high ammonia, high nitrite, and high nitrate. So if you have ever set up an aquarium before, you've probably encountered this. It's something called new tank syndrome, where you have spikes of ammonia, spikes of nitrite. We try to simulate all of that in advance of an animal ever touching the system to make sure the water is as safe as it possibly can be for the animals. Now, we talked about ammonia in terms of our chemistry, so let's talk about nitrite. So right over here, we've already set up our nitrite analyses as well. So here, we've got what's going to be a 0 result. Here, we've got an elevated nitrite. So typically, we do not want to see that in a system that has animals in it. But again, this is a system that we are seeding to get ready for animals to go in. So the bacteria is in there, it's converting ammonia from ammonia to nitrite, and eventually it will start converting that nitrite over to nitrate. It typically takes a week to 3 weeks, depending upon how you're cycling the system, to really fully grow the bacterial constituent of the system. So, to recap, while fish are pretty, I love them, it's the bacteria that is really the workhorse in the system that's making sure the water is safe for the animals. So while I'm here monitoring what the bacteria is doing, they're in fact doing all of the work for us. So one of the other pieces of equipment that I introduced was the spectrophotometer. So the spectrophotometer is actually going to handle our ammonia and our nitrite tests. So while we can see that there's a color change, what we can't do with the reagent is we can't quantify the color change, because all of us are going to perceive that color change slightly differently. So we're going to utilize an eye, basically, which is what the spectrophotometer is in this case, to quantify that amount of color change for us, so we take the human subjectivity out of it. So we won't be using the spectrophotometer for that sample, but one of the other things we can get into is how we process seawater. So at Florida Aquarium, we're very lucky that we can work with the Mosaic Company to have them bring us fresh seawater from out in the Gulf of Mexico. So we have an established place where they pick up our seawater, and they bring us about 300,000 gallons at a time. And we received a batch of seawater not too long ago, and we're actually in the process of processing that seawater right now. To process that seawater, we actually bring it in, we pull it off of the barge. It is pre-treated with a UV sterilizer, basically, and it then goes into our reservoirs, and then it is mechanically filtered through big sand filters to remove any particulate, anything that's in there that we don't necessarily want going into any of our aquariums. The last thing we do is we ozonate that water. So we generate ozone on site, and we contact that water in the reservoir to bring up our residual, which is going to be the amount of residual disinfectant for all intents and purposes in the water, to make sure that it is sterile before it's ever released to the systems. So we monitor that process as well, and that's one we can do right now that goes relatively quickly. So we'll go ahead and pull up a sample of our seawater system. Oh, I already tossed that one. So I guess we're going to do fresh water instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a DPD packet to this sample to see if we get a color change. And we should see a slight pink color change with this after our 3-minute reaction time. So each sample that we run takes about 3 minutes to react, and then we will run it through the spectrophotometer to quantify our results.
So Veronica, we talked a lot about reactors and color changes. When you are doing these experiments, what makes the water change color, and what does that necessarily mean for your sample?
That is a really good question. So every different reaction uses different chemicals, and that's getting into some pretty intensive chemistry. So for the nitrite test, our nitrite test uses the diazotization method, which is incredibly challenging to say. And there is actually a indicator dye in that particular reagent that will cause the pink color change. The same thing happens in our ammonia reagents. So there is an indicator at a certain pH with a certain concentration of ammonia that will cause the green color change. The same thing is true of our DPD test for our ozonated systems, for our chlorinated systems. The same thing is true of that. There is an indicator that works with the chemical to provide a color change. That same thing is true of the titration we just did. So we did the titration, we changed the pH on the sample. That caused the color indicator to change with the presence of a change in pH, basically. So every different chemical is slightly different between each test, but there's basically an indicator that causes a color change. Great question.
That's awesome. And we take care of a lot of animals at the Florida Aquarium. So is it challenging to mitigate these large habitats that have a lot of animals in them? And how do you test the water, and what do you look for in these big habitats?
There's really no difference in the laboratory management of a large system versus a small system. They all see the same suite of chemical analyses. What is different is larger systems tend to be more stable. Smaller systems tend to be less stable, which makes sense. In a large system, say you have 500,000 gallons of water, you've got an awful lot of dilution factor there. In a smaller system, there's a lot less dilution factor there, and there's typically more stock in terms of bioload of animals or bacteria or any of those kinds of things. So there's more stock in those systems. So for our larger systems that tend to be, let's say, our sand tiger system, we tend to run that once a week for every single parameter. We'll do ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, pH, salinity, alkalinity. We don't do calcium on that one, but alkalinity. So we'll run that every single week, and we tend to see very, very, very little fluctuation in that system. It's very stable. Nothing's really happening in there. In some of our smaller systems, there can be more fluctuations with maybe increase of food or changing bioload, adding another fish, or removing one, or something along those lines can all impact your water chemistries. The systems that tend to have the most variability in terms of what their chemistries are the systems that we're seeding. So when we are seeding a system, we are inoculating it with bacteria, we are feeding it with ammonium chloride, we are trying to encourage that bacteria to grow and form biofilms along the substrates, the surfaces, all of those things, so that there's a healthy concentration of bacteria to help pull out ammonia and nitrite before fish ever go into the system. So those systems tend to be very unstable. They tend to have high ammonia, high nitrite, depending on what we're doing. And then the first couple of days, weeks, once animals are introduced into the system, those tend to be fairly unstable as well. So you're never quite sure exactly how much waste you're going to deal with when you're seeding a system. So you have to kind of manage the system afterwards. Now, when it comes to actual management of the system, what if we have a high ammonia, or what if we have a high nitrite, or what if we have a high nitrate? What do we do? Well, at that point, we do water changes. So, given that we can get 300,000 gallons of seawater relatively easily, it's processed relatively easily, it's easy for us to do water exchanges. So our animals have access to clean, natural seawater at all times. So if we don't like a particular parameter, our ammonia is elevated out of a range that we want to see it, we can do a 10, 15, 20% water change to dilute that ammonia to give the bacteria a little bit more time to figure out how to start pulling all of that out.
Awesome. We have a question from Rebecca. How do we test dissolved oxygen and CO2 levels in the systems?
Wonderful question. I actually did not get into that. So dissolved oxygen, we actually use, and my probe just walked out of the lab, or I would love to show it to you. We actually use a YSI Pro Solo, so it uses an optical cap on it to test dissolved oxygen. So it's a very simple piece of equipment, basically uses a laser, shines the laser at a membrane on a cap, and then somehow from that can tell us what the dissolved oxygen is. So we do that. The next thing we do for CO2, we don't test CO2 directly. It is something that exists. We don't have that capability in-house yet. I'm working on it. But we do have the ability to do TGP, or total gas pressure. So we have TGP meters in several different systems, and we can take the data from the TGP meter and compare that to atmospheric pressure, and then we can calculate, given that you have the same proportions of oxygen to nitrogen to carbon dioxide, so 21 to 79 to all of the rest of your gases, we can compare that to what we're seeing in our systems and extrapolate. So that was a very good question. I didn't expect that one.
Awesome. So we have a lot of fans at home who may have home aquariums. What would be a piece of advice that you'd give to people who want to have freshwater, saltwater fish at home?
I would say if you want to have freshwater fish and you live in the Tampa region, pay very close attention to what the pH requirements are for those animals, what the alkalinity requirements are for those animals. Tampa water is very hard. That said, everything's manageable if that's something that you want to do. The next thing I would tell you is definitely pay attention to what your chlorine values are of your Tampa water, because they are elevated. Pay attention to your ammonias, pay attention to your nitrites. Those are slightly elevated from the water treatment process from the city. So for fish, I would invest in water quality testing kits. You can get them at any pet supply store. You can probably get them at large box grocery stores, those kinds of things. So I would definitely pay close attention to that. If it's going to come down to managing a saltwater system, again, you're going to be starting with city tap water. So again, you're going to want to look at chlorine, ammonia, nitrite that's coming into your source water. And then you're going to want to look at your artificial seawater. More likely than not, that's what you're going to be using, whether it's an instant ocean or a crystal sea or any of those kinds of things. Invest in a good artificial seawater, and then monitor your chemistries. And also remember, when starting an aquarium, while it's really, really, really exciting, you will be most successful if you introduce animals very slowly over time. It's very easy, and I was guilty of this with my first aquarium, so please learn from me. I was very excited, and I wanted all of these different animals, but I didn't really understand that as soon as I added animals to water with no bacterial population, that the chemistries would very rapidly get out of control. So if you're starting up a new aquarium, invest in water quality testing equipment and supplies, and it's not terribly expensive. And just take a measured approach to how you add your animals into the system, and definitely make sure that the chemistries that you're able to sustain in your aquarium are something that that animal can thrive in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Veronica, for teaching us all about how we keep our animals happy and healthy and our water clean for our animals. Next week, we'll be joining Matt on Monday for Mondays with Matt on C-SPAN. Until Monday, we hope everybody has an awesome weekend, stays dry, and stays safe at home. Thanks, guys.